Hello, and thank you for joining me. My name is Zoe Michaels, and I am here for this interview a little bit to get started about my backstory and how I got started. I'd really like to tell you that, I've been writing all along, and on some level, that's true. But when I look back at my journey, I really wish I could go back in time and talk to my younger self. There were so many clues that, hey, you should be a writer. And among them was just that from a very young age, I enjoyed writing. I would look for opportunities to write, even when I wasn't assigned to write at school. I was very much a bookworm. I loved to read, so much so that when lights were supposed to be out at night, if someone were to come into my room unexpectedly, they would have found me cozied up with with my back against the wall, reading by the light of the lamppost outside our house. I love to write. I love to read. I would look for opportunities to connect with people through my writing. Even at an older age, when I was trying to find someone to marry, I would share my writing with them in hopes that in some way it would connect us. And so it was very much how I connected with people then. It's how I connect with people now. There was this one point in time in a classroom that one of my teachers paid me probably the best possible compliment, but I really didn't know what to do with it at the time. And it was that he really enjoyed it when I would read out loud. And he had made the comment that he could imagine me doing that for a living one day. The young person that I was very pleased at that comment, but could not even imagine how one would go about finding a job where they were just reading all day, short of being an editor like for Reader's Digest or something like that. It was only many years later that I realized, oh, there's such a thing as voiceover, and this is possibly a career path, and one that I still aspire to. So I would write for other people. I would write for myself, even if I was trying to logically think something out, or just even as a coping mechanism in my life when I was trying to process some maybe unhappy, events and trying to focus on the positive. I would sit and I would write. So there's a question in the interviews that if you could share the most interesting story that occurred to you in the course of your career, I really think that's like asking a parent to choose their favorite child. When I go out in the world and I interact with people, and sometimes even just the most simple of interactions, ideas just occur. And I'm sure that's like that for many writers. Sometimes the most mundane things with a little bit of curiosity, suddenly it's like, ooh, there's a story there. I had that experience very recently. Just a few weeks ago, I was shopping at my neighborhood Aldi's, and I've interacted with this cashier a time or two. We've always had very pleasant exchanges. And I just happened to be in the mood to buy a bar of chocolate on my way out this last shopping trip. And she almost forgot to ring it up. She was in such a hurry, and she caught herself and she did ring it up. But, we laughed and made a joke about how, she said that, she would be very popular if she gave people free chocolate. And I agreed. And I said, well, we'd have to start calling you Wonka. And she thought for just a brief half second and said, I want to be called something different. And we laughed, and I went on my way out the door. But that conversation stuck with me. I thought, what if there's a story there? And so I began working on an outline for a story. And then after running into that idea for a story, maybe serendipity, but I have seen some news articles that kind of tie in with my story, and I thought, whoa, okay. So it just seems to be very timely. So that's been something most recent. There's a question about what was the biggest challenge you faced in your journey to becoming a writer? How did you overcome it? And can you share a story about that other aspiring writers can learn from? And I think for me, the biggest thing was finding the courage in the first place to share my work. I used to write purely for business purposes or for my own, as I mentioned, for coping or for reasoning things out. But I never really aspired to write books to share with other people, except for one that I did in my early 20s for just a very limited audience. And so when I did decide to jump into this, I really did not have the understanding and groundwork to be successful at getting my books in front of people. And so the biggest challenge was really trying to understand, how do I get people to read and acknowledge my work? And there's so much information out there, and there's so many people out there, who are there to help you. And their help maybe wasn't as helpful, to me at least, as I would have wished because of their motives. And there are people out there that are very good at their jobs, and there are other people out there that they're probably very good at what they do, but maybe not so well as explaining what they actually bring to the table that maybe they do that you aren't able to do for yourself. So for me, navigating that was the biggest challenge. And I'm stubborn. I waited more than a year before I finally, after listening to enough other writers and getting feedback and fully vetting him, hired a publicist. And finally, I feel like maybe I'm making some traction, finding some headway. But let me try to think of one of the things. In the very early days, I did get one piece of information that was super useful and from the most unexpected of places. In my desire to put the word out there about my books and gain feedback from the wrong sources, I happened to also post and receive feedback from someone who was a life coach. She had no agenda. She offered me 20 minutes of her time with no strings attached. She never called me again, never reached out after our initial conversation. But those 20 minutes were so helpful because she asked the question, Zoe, what do you, in your opinion, what does an author do? And we focused those 20 minutes on, okay, what does an author do? What does the day-to-day life, do? Is it just writing? What else are you doing to reach your goals? And she motivated me to do something that I had been aware of peripherally, but was really, I didn't want to do. And that was because, amazingly, I consider myself a shy person, despite all appearances. And she motivated me to finally reach out and be on a podcast, to sign up to be a guest. And I really had been very resistant to that because I had researched and found that even at one point. But being on that podcast to talk about one of my books, one of my early books, really catapulted me in the direction I needed to be in. It got me in front of people, started getting my name known, started getting my books known. And by the end of that first podcast as a guest, I thought, I could do this, meaning that I could host my own podcast. And I started asking questions, and thank goodness my experience with that first podcaster was so, so good. And he was very helpful in feedback to me. I'm so grateful to him. I had a few other experiences that were positive and a couple negative. And I'm so grateful that my negative experience came after so much positive, because maybe I wouldn't have gone down the track of launching my own podcast. but I did. And I'm so glad I did, because that's what led to me getting to know other writers and being able to um, find out about my publicist and talk to so many of his clients that convinced me that, yes, this is someone I can trust. The next question here is, it's been said that our mistakes can be the greatest teachers. Can you share a story about the funniest mistake you made when you were first starting? And can you tell us a lesson you learned from that? Really, I think the biggest mistake for me was believing that if I found a publisher, that they would be instrumental in providing guidance in how best to market my books. In my mind, that's what a publisher does. They don't simply put your book, on the web, which I could do myself, or, get it into bookstores, which again, there's mechanisms for that. You can do that yourself as an author. I wanted guidance. And, if there's publishers out there that do, then I apologize to them. But the one I hired, based on the reviews, the trust rating, in the end, it felt like they knew less about marketing than I did. And I feel like that was one of my biggest mistakes. In the end, the best guidance I received was from other writers. And that was with the ones that I interviewed in the podcast. I learned so much from them, just all these different times of asking questions. In your opinion, were you a natural born writer, or did you develop the aptitude later on? And can you explain what you mean? That's the next question. And I would have to say natural ability is a great place to start, but it's not the only path. I do think that I've had a natural ability from the beginning. I always had a love of the written word. And I definitely have to say I inherited that from my father and from his side of the family. I have an aunt, a great aunt actually, and several others who were poets in the family. So the writing was there all along. But I do believe too that any talent unharnessed can only take you so far. You have to hone those skills. It's just like if someone was at the crater of Diamond State Park and they just picked up a pretty pebble. They might not know the value ever if they didn't take time to have it polished. There are some very famous accounts of very valuable diamonds that have come from that park, and it was as simple as someone picking up something they just thought was a nice pebble. So it's the same way with writing and natural ability. It has to be shaped and polished, just like a diamond. The next question is, what are some of the most interesting or exciting projects you're working on right now? The truth is, I have a short attention span, so I bounce between projects. I have, a good 3 or 4 irons in the fire, and I bounce between them because some days I'm in the mood for this type of story, and some days I'm in the mood for that kind of story. And so one of the ones I'm working on, and I'm not sure when I'm going to actually get it published. One is kind of a romance. I'm calling it Salt and Silver. And it's about a man who was basically a third wheel in a relationship. He and his best friend met this amazing woman at the same time, and she fell in love with his friend, who was the less stable of the two. And she stood by him. She was loyal to him for many years. But then one day he disappeared. So in the meantime, this man who's the kind of the third wheel, he's been a supportive friend to them both all those years, but he never stopped loving her. And there's more to the story, of course, and I don't want to give the whole thing away. Another one I have in the works, I call Angry Air. And it's about a man from an indigenous nation located in the Sierra Nevadas around the 1800s. And he disappears from his time. And so he's believed to be dead. Well, the reality is he turns up far in the future at a time when the land that was beautiful and pristine during his lifetime is now full of pollution, and the entire world has just gone crazy by comparison. So those are the two that have my attention. But I've also been busy this year talking to people about the prequel to The Echoed Mind, which is Fractured Shadows. And as I've been talking to people, I had originally planned to put that on the shelf for a little while and come back to part 2 of The Echoed Mind later. But the more I talk about it, the more I come up with ideas of things that maybe I'm going to go a different direction with the part two than what I originally had in mind. So I've got some ideas percolating over there, although I have not started writing in earnest on that yet. But I have to say that some of the questions that have been asked by fellow authors really, they've really inspired me to kind of go in a different direction. I was always going to do a surprise, but now I'm going to do something that even surprises me. So the main part of this interview, the article this is called is 5 Things You Need to Be a Successful Author or Writer. And so there are some things that they asked me to share with you, 5 things to be a successful writer. So these are the 5 that made the cut. There was another one that I'm going to throw in here just real quick, that after I made this initial list, I thought about money. But I think if I had thought about budget concern, what it costs to bring a book into being, that might have prevented me from writing and from finding so much pleasure and joy. So while it can be a consideration for people, it could also be something that stops you from pursuing something that you'll never regret doing. So these are the 5 that I think are important to share. The first is strong observation skills and curiosity. Because curiosity, it fuels the imagination, and it causes you to take an ordinary situation or conversation and say, what if? What if is so powerful. It's what drives stories. What if, that brief conversation at the grocery store about the chocolate never happened? But it did. And so what if there was a world where this person was trapped here and she is a whole different direction than Willy Wonka, and what kind of story can I do with that? Or what if a man from the 1800s mysteriously turned up in the year 2050? The next one I would say is determination. I can't even remember how many years ago, but I was on the island of Curacao, and walking through the port back to the ship, there were, of course, the many souvenirs, and one of them was this sign that said, when things don't go right, go left. And I love that. Any worthwhile pursuit is going to have obstacles. Sometimes the obstacle is external, and sometimes it's internal. And the thing to do is figure out what's standing in your way and figure out a way to get around it, to move forward. The next thing on my list is realistic expectations. When I first started releasing my books, I thought, well, family and friends. I know so many people, I'm going to have readers just from family and friends. Well, no. Family and friends love you, and they will read for love of you, 1 or 2. They might even do a review. But the reality is, they're not your readers. I mean, as surprising as it is, they are not necessarily going to be your fans, your readers. And that's okay. It's just that they may love something different, and what you're serving is not what they love. However, sometimes well-meaning friends and family can prove to be an obstacle. They out of love for you might say, well, this is good, but it needs to go this direction, or it needs to go that direction. You don't want to release it until it's perfect. And they're doing it for love of you, but the truth of the matter is, perfect may never come. For those who watch The Handmaid's Tale, there's a line that Aunt Lydia says, and it's appropriate here. One can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. It is better to have a solid story, and yes, it might need some polishing, a little bit of, TLC, but if you're looking for perfect, you're never going to reach perfect. and then you're never going to publish that story that someone else is going to love. Put out a good, solid story. Just be determined to be realistic that, this is what you need to do. And you're going to find the readers. You're going to find the people who love that story, and they'll come back for more. Number 4 on my list is purposeful procrastination, because it's not really procrastination if it's on purpose. As writers, we get excited about our ideas. We imagine this world or this situation, and we fully immerse ourselves in our character's world. We want to get the story on the page while it's still fresh in our mind. And there's nothing wrong with getting your ideas on the page. And I often do it so I don't forget. But then sometimes you need to take a step back, and you need to let those ideas marinate and stew a bit. Just like if you were cooking a beef stew, if you cook it too quickly, the flavors don't have time to really marinate and mesh and bring through that rich flavor that you're looking for. And it's the same with a story. Here's your key ingredients. Here's the mixture. This is where we're at. But now, step back. Let those ideas marinate a little bit. Let them grab a little flavor. And now let's come back and adjust and tweak and season it. And let's put this together. The truth is, you might surprise yourself with the ideas and how the story you think is already perfect can be improved. Number 5 on my list is never too early to find the right help. As I mentioned before, the obstacles can be external. People, pretend to be professionals who charge money to help you, but what they're doing isn't helpful at all. Either because they don't know what they're doing, or because they're not who they claim to be, or more importantly, they weren't what you were looking for, even though they appeared to be at first. The power is in speaking with other experienced writers, and not the ones who reach out to you by email because you don't know if they're really writers or not. Go find some honest to goodness real writers. If you have to go to one of their sightings, to one of their groups, or some forum, but find real writers. Don't go with the unsolicited email ones. You'll be disappointed, because odds are they're looking to sell you something and you don't need it. And I think that takes care of all 5 of those questions. There is another question here. What is one habit you believe contributed the most to becoming a writer? One of the things suggested is it discipline, play, craft, study. I wish I could say I was disciplined. In some respects in my life, I am. But I really can't claim that as a contributing factor. I cannot say that I'm a disciplined person. I do make it a point to follow through on things when I set my mind to it. When I say I'm going to do something, I do my level best to actually follow through, because I hate disappointing people. But for me, more than anything else, it's about staying alert to people and relationships and maintaining strong curiosity. The moment a question pops into my head or an idea, I write it down. On my phone, I've got a note app that I make immediate notes so I don't forget. If I'm not able to make a note, for example, if I'm driving, thank goodness for the memo app on my phone, there I can speak my idea so I can write it out later. Because sometimes when you're driving or doing things like that, that's when the ideas flow the most, when you don't have a pen or paper handy. The next question here is, what literature do you draw inspiration from, and why? Well, I'm a fan of science fiction and dystopian stories, more so these days than days past. I like really a wide variety of literature that even goes back to the Count of Monte Cristo, David Copperfield, and stories about England during the time of Henry VIII. But in recent years, I like ones that were written by Bella Forrest or Kira Cass and Amy Ewing. I especially love Bella Forrest's books, the Gender Games series, the Child Thief series, The Girl Who Dared to Think, um, because it has that science fiction element, but it also has a little bit of sweet romance mixed in. Um, but it's not the sole focus of the story. I would love to be able to someday say that I'm of the same caliber as these ladies with their writing. So the last thing on this list, I don't know that I'm a person of enormous influence, but I'll take the compliment. So it asks if you could start a movement and bring the most amount of good to the most amount of people. What would it be? The truth is, at this point, I don't know. One of my original thoughts, almost exactly a year ago, I really wanted to help people to find emotional healing, especially after they had been scammed. That was what I wanted to do originally with the podcast that I launched. Unfortunately, they were the people I most wanted to help were the least likely to be my guests because of that emotional scarring that they were dealing with. And I'm so sorry for that. Um, so I had to change my focus on my podcast. But last year helped me so much in talking about what happened with me with writing, and I also discovered kind of a faster healing by combining the idea of affect labeling, which is the act of putting feelings into words, which lessens the emotional intensity, and combining it with the idea of music being like a programming language for the brain. And while you can get some level of healing with music that's already out there in written form by someone else, by actual music artists, I stumbled upon the idea of writing my own music. I wrote my own lyrics based on what I was feeling and based on what I wanted to feel. Um, I actually have kind of a small funny story, I guess. So during this time, because of the all that I was dealing with internally, one of the side effects was that because of the job that I do during the day, which is on the phone, people, for some reason, feel the need to spell their name, even if it's a simple name like Smith. They will spell it over the phone without being asked to do so. And the funny thing is that people with complicated names don't do that. They just say their name. So during this very intense, bad time in my life, that habit of people to spell their names when I didn't need them to and did not want them to, it actually made me very angry. And I had to really keep my temper in check because my job was to be very kind to these people. And so it took a lot of effort to do that. And it just happens that I had the opportunity to sit in on a interview with the author Gabriel Karp, who, if I think remember right, he was like the foremost conflict resolution expert. I think that was how he was presented to us. And he had written a book, Don't Get Mad at a Penguin. And at that point in time, I was on a super tight budget, so I couldn't even afford to get his book, as good as I'm sure it is. But I found out enough about the book and the gist of it to take the principles from it, and I used those principles to write a song that I titled Don't Get Mad at a Penguin. And it was a humorous, fun, kind of childish song, but it worked. And I would play that every time I got mad at someone who was spelling at me. I would play that music, either immediately after the call or at some point in a quiet way so I could still do my work. And over time, I found that it helped me to not feel angry. And there came a point, really just within a few months, that I didn't even need to listen to the song. It was already deeply ingrained that musical programming made all that difference. And here I am almost a year later where, yeah, people still spell and I shrug it off and it is what it is. but thank goodness those feelings of anger are long past, and I'm so glad for that. Um, so that was a nice lesson for me, as far as using affect labeling and music combined to help heal trauma and to also help with that particular issue that was a side effect of that trauma. If you are looking for more information about me and my projects, my email, not my email, my website is zoemichaels.com. And on there, you will find my books, some of the songs I wrote for myself, the more upbeat ones, as well as two podcasts that I run. One is the Molten Truth podcast, which is coming up on a 1-year anniversary come June. And a more recent podcast, Behind the Diagnosis, Famous Lives Untold, that launched back in February. I greatly appreciate you joining me. Thank you so much for your attention, and I wish you the best.